It is often believed that women who remain faithful till the end are exceedingly rare, with only a few exceptions. This perception is well known among men who either worry about it, tolerate it, or strive to overlook it. I shared a life with my wife for nearly 4 decades. We tied the knot when I was 20 years old and she was 19. Our journey was filled with ups and downs, arguments and reconciliations. Yet throughout all those years, I was confident that we never once betrayed each other. It's truly remarkable. To live for so long with an incredibly beautiful woman without ever doubting her love and loyalty. Regardless of where fate took me, she was always by my side. Together we raised 2 wonderful children, our son Paul and our daughter Kasia. They have both grown up, started families, and now have children of their own. I envision spending our twilight years in peace and tranquility, surrounded by our beloved grandchildren. As a doctor, I served in the military for 25 years, achieving the rank of colonel in the medical service before retiring a decade ago. However, retired may be too strong a word even today. I continue to work at a private clinic. While I no longer wield a scalpel as frequently due to my age catching up with me, I still engage in therapeutic consultations. My wife, Nastya, is also employed. She works in an advertising firm, utilizing her training as a designer. Do you think we were experiencing financial difficulties? Absolutely not. We simply pursued our work for personal fulfillment rather than monetary gain. During my service, I had the opportunity to visit numerous places. I spent almost a year in Africa and also traveled to Mongolia and Vietnam. However, truth be told, I rarely had the chance to truly explore these countries. My role as a doctor demanded my full attention, and this was even more intensified while serving in the military. Subsequently, I found myself in the midst of hot spots within the collapsing Soviet Union. Nevertheless, each time I returned home, I believed that my loving wife and children awaited me, or so I thought. Unfortunately, it turned out to be nothing more than wishful thinking. Drinking. Despite her age, my wife managed to preserve her natural beauty. She consistently took care of herself, which allowed her to maintain a youthful figure and a face devoid of wrinkles. When we walked together, people would mistake her for my young mistress. The contrast between us was stark. The young blonde alongside a gray-haired, mature man. Daddy with a young mistress. This contrast amused Nastya greatly, and I must admit it flattered me too. However, as events unfolded, I realized that my amusement was misplaced. It all occurred on a rainy November evening. Have you ever noticed that the events that drastically alter our lives for the worse often transpire on such melancholic autumn nights? It's as if the fading nature seeks to drag us down with its despair. It was a late autumn evening characterized by a chill in the air, and a gentle breeze that carried the remnants of the recent raindrops on the window pane, transforming them into delicate trickles that cascaded down the slopes outside. Seated at the kitchen table, I diligently sifted through a pile of papers, desperately searching for my medical records. It was an upcoming checkup at the health center scheduled for Monday. Locating my immunization card had become imperative, however. On this particular day, my wife's Nasty was absent, having ventured into town earlier to purchase groceries and prepare our Sunday dinner, and engrossed in my task, I spent considerable time delving into the depths of old documents, stumbling upon a revelation that left me profoundly shocked. Amongst the yellow of certificates and faded paperwork, I stumbled upon an extract from my wife's medical records. Its contents pertained to a period in my life where I had embarked on an extensive business trip, rendering me absent from home for nearly a year. The document chronicled events that occurred 4 years after the birth of our daughter. It spoke of Nash's pregnancy and the premature birth of a child named Nastya. Detailed were accounts of various tests, including ultrasound investigations, shedding light on the circumstances surrounding the premature birth. It became apparent that Nastya had given birth to a 6-month-old baby during my absence, who tragically succumbed after 3 days. Further examination of the records revealed a series of tests conducted on both Nastya and the baby encompassing blood types and the rhesus factor. Astonishingly, the baby possessed a blood type of A and a negative rhesus factor, while Nastya and I both shared blood type O and a positive rhesus factor. This realization struck me like a collapsing closet, overwhelming me with the certainty that I could not be the biological father of the child. It was an irrefutable fact, considering that I was physically absent from the country at the time when the child was conceived. The weight of this revelation bore heavily upon me, engulfing me in a maelstrom of emotions as I grappled with the profound implications of this newfound knowledge. The very foundation of my identity as a father had been called into question, leaving me to confront the unsettling truth that the child Nastya bore during my absence could not have been mine from the outset. I stared vacantly at the discharge form, my thoughts scattered and in disarray. Nastya, my wife, had betrayed me. While I was away, she had become pregnant and nearly had a child, but it was who for what felt like an eternity. I struggled to gather myself. Eventually, I mustered the strength to carefully place the document back and discovered a hidden statement tucked away in my briefcase. It was the one thing I needed to regain composure, to suppress the rising turmoil within me. The fact that Nash's infidelity was now documented only intensified my desire to confront her upon her return. But first I needed to make sense of everything. The children. That was a clear matter. There was a 9-year age gap between them. Both Pavel and Katia shared my blood type. Oh, they even bore a resemblance to my younger self as much as children can resemble their father. I had no doubts I was their father. However, that realization offered no solace. I couldn't fathom why she had done this to me. We had married out of love. I had courted her for nearly a year with no other women capturing my attention. Despite my attractive appearance and the interest I received from the opposite sex, Nastya was the only woman in my life, my everything. Throughout our time together, I had always strived to shower her with care and affection. It often seemed like I had never lived a life without her. My wife meant everything and more to me. And now this. My heart ached and, seeking solace, I stepped out onto the balcony to breathe in the fresh air. Looking down, I noticed a car pulling up outside our building, illuminated by a dim street lamp. After a moment, Nastya emerged from the vehicle. Accompanied by a man, he retrieved some packages from the back seat, and Nastya quickly kissed him on the cheek before taking the packages and entering the building. The man settled into the driver's seat and the car slowly drove out of the yard. The more the merrier, it seemed. The front door lock audibly clicked, announcing someone's arrival. Startled by the unexpectedly loud voice of my wife, Yura, I felt a wave of irritation wash over me. I knew I had to control myself, or else we would inevitably end up arguing. Yura, are you home? Nastya. His voice echoed through the house, devoid of any discernible emotion. Miranda came over to talk about something. It's been a while. I'll quickly prepare something. Why are you in such a sullen mood? She planted a kiss on my cheek and the unmistakable scent of alcohol reached my nose. Oh, don't make that face. Miranda and I had a little champagne. She proceeded to wipe off the lipstick stain from my cheek. And a question. Not at me. So she's the one who gave you a ride. I struggled to maintain a calm demeanor. Nastya stared at me with an unfamiliar expression, clearly unsure of how to respond. Yura, don't start overthinking things. I took a cab. Or rather, an acquaintance gave me a list. She hastily replied, desperately searching for the right words. What's the matter? Nothing, I replied, my heart pounding so forcefully that it seemed audible to the neighbors in an attempt to distract myself and regain composure. I stood up and retrieved a full bottle of whiskey. A look of fear flickered across Nash's face as she observed my actions, realizing the gravity of the situation. How can I know? I witnessed it myself while standing on the balcony, observing you, bidding farewell to the driver. I replied. Despite my best efforts, I struggled to maintain my composure and refrained from erupting into a fit of anger. Is that kiss the payment, Yura? I called out in disbelief. What is it? You're a nasty, you responded as I poured myself a glass of whiskey. Sit down, I have some questions for you. I pulled a stool from under the table and retrieved the ill-fated document from the briefcase. Nastya, what is this? I asked, placing the document in front of my wife. She hesitantly flipped through a few pages before hastily retracting her hand. Where did you get this? Nastya looked up at me, her eyes beginning to well up with tears. Did you read it? Nastya, who are you pregnant with? What happened? I picked up the glass, but I couldn't bring myself to take a sip. She remained silent for a while before speaking in an unexpectedly calm tone. It was inevitable. Perhaps it's even for the best that it happened now, she said evenly. Nastya proceeded to explain that during my prolonged absence, as she emphasized, she had met a young man with whom she had fallen deeply in love. He was 11 years her junior. It consumed her like an obsession, something she couldn't resist. At first they went on secret dates, then she sent the children to her mother's place, and eventually he moved into her apartment with her. They started living together as if they were husband and wife. Amid their passionate encounters she became pregnant and he proposed to her, yes, to a married woman, and to the mother of my 2 children. In the midst of infatuation, she secretly harbored a wish that I wouldn't return at all. Envisioning a scenario where everything would magically resolve itself, they would marry and be united. However, fate had other plans. Their premature baby was born and tragically passed away after 3 days. Overwhelmed by sorrow, she burst into tears. I sensed that she had little concern for their other children, following the loss of our child. Our relationship grew cold and she confessed that we became distant from each other. Soon a young woman emerged on the horizon and my lover abandoned me entirely, seeking new adventures elsewhere filled with worry. Nastia took the children and patiently waited for my return. Upon my arrival, she greeted me as though nothing had occurred for years to come. She meticulously played the role of a devoted and caring wife. I was astounded. To be honest, my mind went blank, rendering me unable to think or speak for a while. I sat in silence, fixated on the wall, devoid of any coherent thoughts. Yet there was more to the story. 6 months ago, for a long time, confidant appeared in our town. Their passion reignited with greater intensity, revealing that she had loved him all along. My wife surrendered to his embrace like a ripe fruit falling into fertile soil. They had been seeing each other throughout the years and she desired to embark on a new life, one where, unfortunately, I had no place. She had spent 40 years by my side devoting her prime to our union. Now with the children grown, she yearned for a fresh start with the man she truly loved. As she shared these painful revelations, she was fully aware that each word she uttered was mercilessly stabbing me in the heart. In that moment, she resembled an indifferent executioner, carrying out her duty without a trace of personal attachment. It was nothing but love. Love that has the power to wound. That's where things stand now. You can finally exhale and pour yourself a drink. I refilled my glass with whiskey and downed it in one gulp, but it had little effect. Frustrated, I contemplated the bottle, examining its color under the light. It appeared to be a normal shade of light brown, just as expected from a well-aged Irish whiskey. I finally realized the solution. I needed to pour more or perhaps skip the glass altogether and drink straight from the bottle. It's convenient, really, how the neck of a good whiskey bottle is designed like a decanter, making it easy to handle without a glass. Nasty. She has sat across from me in silence, which made me slightly concerned. Had something happened? Or maybe she had simply run out of things to say. She had always been so articulate and impressive. A clever girl, indeed. She had managed to deceive me for years, and if I hadn't found my discharge form, I might never have suspected a thing. Ma, a true woman of her heritage and her choice of words. Remarkable. But really, it's not such a big deal. These things happen, that's all. Feeling the chill from the open window, I decided it was time to close it. I stood up, kicked the stool with my foot, and headed towards the bedroom without uttering a word. I dressed myself, packed a few essentials into a bag, and silently made my way towards the exit. "You're a nasty." His voice hung in the air, partially uncertain. "You don't have to leave for the night, you know." I glanced back at her. Her figure stood out against the dark kitchen doorway. "Aren't you going to say anything to me?" she asked, her voice trembling. Was she on the verge of tears, or was it just my imagination? Poor girl, so anxious. I shrugged, opened the door, and stepped outside, making sure not to bump my horns against the doorframe. Autumn awaited my presence outside as I stepped into the cool, moist air, adjusting my bag on my shoulder. I strolled leisurely along the sidewalk, strewn with golden leaves. An overwhelming urge to smoke seized me momentarily, prompting me to absent-mindedly check my pockets. But of course, I found nothing. It had been 20 years since I quit smoking, and Astra's insistence. She had expressed genuine concern for my well-being and desired a long life together. The hour was late, and the city seemed to surrender itself to a restless slumber. Dimly lit windows dotted the houses while the only source of illumination on the nearly deserted streets came from the distant street lamps. My cell phone chimed, indicating a message from Nastia. She worried about her husband. Me. I turned off the phone, opting to silence her concerns. Suddenly, an intense longing washed over me and I bit down on the collar of my coat, suppressing a desperate howl. It was in that moment that I fully comprehended the weight of what had transpired. I even shook my head as if by some futile gesture I could dispel the tormenting thoughts consuming me. What should I do? Where should I go? The easiest path would be to slam the door and depart with my head held high. But then where? To our children. They already had enough burdens to bear. I had never had a mistress, though. Maybe it was time to consider it, or perhaps simply immerse myself in work as if it were my sole duty. I would spend the night contemplating and come morning, make a final decision. Slowly, I traversed the darkened houses, careful not to slip on the slick foliage blanketing the ground. "Hey man, do you have a smoke?" a voice called out. I turned around and descended into darkness. Nastia gently disengaged herself from her lover's touch, resting upon her chest, and quietly rose from the bed. For the first time in recent memory, they had expressed their love without the fear of being discovered. Wrapping a robe around her, she made her way to the kitchen. An unfinished bottle of whiskey occupied the table. She never bothers to clean up after herself. I have to do everything, she mused, but her thoughts inevitably drifted back to her husband, Yura. Where did he go? He's not answering his phone. I wonder if something has happened. Nastya glanced out the window, observing the autumn night enveloped in rain. Why did her heart ache so unbearably? P.S. It's the more we strive to do good for the woman we love, the more it seems she begins to despise us and turn away. The intense brightness flooded my vision, reminiscent of a platoon of special forces infiltrating a hideout of rogue raspberries. Finally, a man's voice exclaimed from nearby, struggling. I turned my head to face the source. Welcome back, Yuri Ivanov. My boss, brimming with joy, gently stroked my hand. Did I managed to utter my words. Escaping me was effort. Yes, you're in our clinic, he replied, his delight evident. You were brought to the emergency room last night due to a head injury. Fortunately, your ID was with you, so they reached out to us. We swiftly retrieved you and performed surgery immediately. The operation was a success, and now you're back with us. We've informed your children and your wife. Your son is on his way, and the investigator mentioned he would arrive this afternoon. My wife? Do I have a wife? The recent events stirred up a pain of unease within me. A wife? I had never been married. The creaking of the door interrupted my thoughts. Daddy. Hello. My son Paul entered, planting a kiss on my cheek. How are you? You had us worried. He carefully placed a package on the bedside table. Here are some fruits and juice. That's all they allow for now, Paul informed me, adjusting my blanket. Mom couldn't make it yet. She's caught up with some urgent matters. She doesn't need to come, I replied, my tone firm. All right, just try not to worry, Paul reassured me, understanding my sentiment. Pasha appeared to possess an uncanny knowledge of the details surrounding our breakup. I couldn't help but wonder what Nastya had divulged to him. But really, what could one expect from an ex-wife in such a situation? He never loved me, never showed me affection. He extinguished the woman within me. Well, enough of shedding tears over it as she could cook. The big snake used to say the past is inconsequential. 2 weeks later, I was discharged. Nastya attempted to visit me twice, but I declined to see her. The past holds no significance. For the first time, I rented a small apartment close to the clinic where I worked and began adjusting to a single life. The dissolution of my marriage had a dual impact on me. On one hand, there was the pain of betrayal, and on the other hand, there were uncertain prospects that I couldn't quite comprehend. One thing was certain, though I had no intentions of pursuing new relationships with women, I had inoculated myself against the prospect. Then came the divorce, and I found myself not only without a wife, but also without a home. The children took a neutral stance, although it was evident that they leaned more towards their mother's side work. I resumed performing surgeries. I attempted to numb the anguish in my soul through my work, and to some extent, I succeeded. Unlike some forsaken husbands, I did not drown myself in alcohol. Around 2 months later, an old friend reached out to me requesting to meet Yura. Do you remember a few years ago when I borrowed a substantial sum of money from you? He initiated the conversation. I recollected that incident 3 years prior. Sergei had borrowed a considerable amount of money from me. He faced significant business troubles and had no one else to turn to for assistance. At that time, I had just sold my mother's apartment and had the funds available. When I lent the money to my friend, I didn't set a specific deadline for repayment, understanding that Sergei wouldn't be able to return it immediately. Eventually, Sergei resolved his affairs. However, he wasn't prompt in repaying his debt. I realized that if I were to bring up the issue, I would risk losing my friend. My father used to say, when you lend money to a friend, consider it a gift. And if you value that person, don't remind them of the debt. When the time is right, they will repay it if they can. Thank you so much for the help you provided me earlier. I'm now back on track and thriving beyond expectations. Sergei expressed with gratitude. I made an investment with the money you lent me, and it has proven to be quite lucrative. Thus far, he handed me a bank card as he continued. This represents my repayment with interest. It's 5 times the amount you originally lent me. Thanks to this newfound financial stability, I was able to purchase a charming cottage not far from the city, along with the car having little time to attend to household matters. I decided to hire some assistants. I found a young woman almost 15 years my junior, who had previous experience in marriage, but was now separated from her ex-husband of nearly 2 decades. Unfortunately, they were unable to have children due to her infertility, which ultimately led to their separation. I learned these details from a neighbor since Natasha seldom spoke about her past. Initially, I had no romantic intentions toward her. She was simply hired as my assistant. This arrangement continued for nearly 6 months until an unexpected incident occurred while I was chopping wood. One day, I suddenly fell ill, overwhelmed by a severe headache. I lost consciousness. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in a hospital bed with Natasha sitting beside me. She had promptly called for an ambulance when she found me in that state, and the paramedics arrived to find her, cradling my head in her lap. Although my condition improved, recovering from a cranial injury was not an easy feat. However, this incident prompted me to view Natasha in a different light, and it was then that I realized the true beauty within her. Naturally, our relationship evolved into something more intimate, and at a certain point, I gathered the courage to propose to her. We decided to get married in the autumn, knowing that we couldn't have children of our own. This realization allowed us to embrace our love without any reservations. However, around 3 months after our wedding, Natasha started experiencing discomfort, including vomiting and headaches. Concerned, I immediately took her to the clinic where I work. To our astonishment, we discovered that she had been pregnant for nearly 2 months. I vividly remember Natasha's words at that moment, confidently declaring, "No matter what happens, I'm keeping this baby." I embraced her tightly, pressing her close to me as I gently kissed her tearful eyes. In that moment, a profound realization dawned upon me of failure to close one door before us. It would undoubtedly open another, revealing new possibilities. Life had been gradually improving, bringing a sense of hope. However, on the eve of the new year, a phone call from Nastya disrupted the tranquility of my days. "We need to meet," she pleaded desperately over the phone. "I have made a reservation at a restaurant. Please come at 7 p.m., I beg you." And so Nastya sat before me, appearing humble and full of remorse. "Ira, please forgive me," she implored, her eyes brimming with tears. "Not a single day passed when I didn't think of you. I made a terrible mistake. I betrayed you, our family, our children." Her words flowed and I remained silent, gazing upon the woman I had once loved madly, the woman I would have given my life for, the same woman who had callously betrayed me, not once, but twice, the woman who had deceived me for nearly 2 decades, cutting me out of her life and leaving for another man. Now she had suddenly awakened to her senses, seeking a return to me. Nasty repeated over and over that her time, apart from me, had revealed the depth of her love that she now understood. I was the only true man in her life. Strangely, she resembled the sirens of Greek mythology. Her words captivated me, lulling me into a fantasy where I alone possessed her heart. I'm sorry," she chanted like a spell. And as I gazed at her lips, painted with bright lipstick, my ears relished her sweet words while my imagination painted vivid images of her bestowing those kisses and caresses upon her lover. Could she honestly expect me to believe her? That she was confused, unsure of what she wanted? This woman who betrayed me had a child with her lover, abandoned me, and spent her free time with another man without a second thought. She returned, claiming to love only me. She had conveniently found an excuse for her cruelty and left me without a second thought. She had indulged in sensual pleasures with her lover multiple times, carefully planning the moment to deliver one final blow. And now she was here, offering me the only precious thing she had left, already being used by her lover. She realized he only wanted her for amusement and money, that there was no future with him. After this realization, she came crawling back to me, hoping to regain what she had lost. Oh dear God, did she truly believe I was foolish enough to believe her lies? I listened in silence to her remorse-filled monologue. There was nothing left for me to say. I didn't revel in her humiliation or take pleasure in her downfall. In some way, I even felt pity for her as a fellow human being. After all, we had spent 40 years together, but our encounter had to come to an end. Just then, my phone rang. Natasha called, asking for the location to pick me up. I provided her with the address and bid farewell. "Is she your partner?" Nastya asked me softly, her eyes filled with tears. "Yes," I replied. "And how long have you been together?" "For about 1.5 years now." "These things happen," I said as I rose from my seat. "Goodbye, Nastya. I hope you find happiness." As I exited the restaurant, I glanced back. Nastya stood there, hands clasped to her chest, gazing at me through the festively adorned window. People bustled around me, hurrying to their destinations. Last moved forward. Across the street, a Coca-Cola advertisement flickered enticingly in bright lights. "Drink it and feel the joy," they claimed. I tried it, but it was a lie. I entered my car, turning the key in the ignition. The engine purred smoothly and tranquilly. I turned left and merged into the stream of bustling cars, disappearing into the flow of life's relentless movement.